Empire of the Vampire by Jay Kristoff is the best terrible book I've ever read. Although I should clarify at the beginning that I have not finished it. I'm about 200 pages into this 700-page beastly tome of a fantasy novel. And it is truly dreadful. However, there are a lot of really great bits too. So in that sense, you're kind of getting double the bang for your buck with this, because you can really enjoy all of the great bits, the legitimately excellent parts of this massive, oversized gothic fantasy thing, while also laughing at the really, really dreadful parts, which makes it doubly great. Is this perfect? Is this a perfect novel? You're going to enjoy all the bad bits, and the good bits. So there's no downside. In a really twisted, horrible way, this is the greatest novel ever written. I love this book. So much. There is so much wrong with it. So many terrible, dreadful, awkward, embarrassing writing, plotting, and framing decisions that have gone into creating it. And also a lot of really genuinely entertaining stuff that is very heavily inspired by a lot of the things that I enjoy, to the point of being derivative. Let me start by telling you what it's about. The protagonist of Empire of the Vampire is a man called Gabriel de Leon. His name is French for some reason. Everything in this book is French for some reason. The characters all say oui instead of yes for some reason. The author is not French, and it is not set in France. That's the French police coming to take Jay Kristoff away. I think he's Australian. Anyway, Gabriel de Leon is some guy who grew up in a nowhere place, in a village somewhere. When he was a kid, about 5 years old, the world was plunged into darkness. One day, the sun set, and it didn't really rise again. Or it did, it still rises, but it doesn't give off any heat or light or something, and no one seems to know why. But what this means is that vampires, which have always existed and just kind of hidden themselves away, can now come out to play and build themselves an empire. And so they have. When Gabriel is about 13 years old, he encounters a vampire and has a run-in that changes his life, mostly because it reveals to him that he has a lot of super strength. And the reason Gabriel has super strength is because his human dad is not his dad, and at some point his mum fucked a vampire, which apparently happens sometimes because they are really sexy and charming. And so Gabriel is half vampire. A half-breed, I think they're called. I can't remember all the terms in this. You know, fantasy, blah blah blah, lots of words. It also mentions that only men can be half-breeds. I don't know why. Male power fantasy, I guess, which is one of the book's biggest drawbacks, but also most entertaining features. So Gabriel is whisked away to become a silver saint, I think they're called, which are these vampire hunters that are perfectly bred and trained to be vampire hunters because they are half-breeds. Therefore, they have all the strengths and benefits of vampires, and the only negative is that they have bloodlust. They like to drink blood. So he's Blade from the Blade comics / movies. He's Blade. But there's a lot of Blades out there, and he's part of this cult of assassin / vampire hunter things. That's your setup. An empire is being built by the Forever King, I think he's called, a really tough vampire. There are multiple vampire houses, and each one has different specific skills and traits. And you have this hunter guild of half-breed vampire hunters that are trying to fight back against the Forever King and his empire. Now let's talk about why this book is so dreadful and why I love it so much. First of all, you've got the framing device, which is irritating and obtuse. The framing device goes like this. It's the future. Gabriel de Leon is about 35 years old, and at this point he's a legend. He's a great vampire-slaying hero person, and he's been captured by this empire, and he is jailed at the top of a big tower. His jailer is some vampire who has been tasked with sitting down with him in his cell and writing down his entire backstory for reasons. The reasons are so that we get to read it. That's it. This framing device is entirely derivative of the Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss. The Name of the Wind, The Wise Man's Sphere, and a third book that will never come out. Those books have the same framing device, but they make more sense contextually. And this framing device is really beautifully written in those books, at least as far as I remember. In this, it is awkward exposition for the sake of it. It is terribly shoehorned in, and the worst thing about it is, at least to the point that I've read, 200 pages in, the entire book is written in speech marks because the framing device continues through the narrative. Every line of first-person narration from the perspective of Gabriel has quotation marks at the beginning and end of it. And that means speech within his first-person narrative, as he's telling this vampire jailer his story, have double quotation marks inside. So every line that begins with dialogue starts with 3 quotation marks, and you have to pay close attention to see if you're currently inside his story or inside the prison cell being told the story. It's not like the framing device is a prologue and then we move into the first-person narrative. No. The framing device continues forth for no reason. It's obtuse, it's awkward, it's silly, and it makes it very, very funny when he is acting out specific lines of dialogue between himself and other characters. So when he's having an argument in the story with a woman, for example, you have to imagine him playing these characters, doing the voices, basically doing some sort of audiobook narration to his jailer, doing the accents, doing girl voices, etc. Because there are really, really long sections of the book that are just dialogue, and he's just relaying it all to his jailer. It's so awkward when you picture it that way. I love it. It's dreadful. It's stupid. How did anyone think this was a good idea? Now, the most egregious, awkward, terrible thing about this book isn't even that. It's the edginess of it. This is a gothic, fantastical, horror-tinged, blood-soaked male power fantasy. And it is full of really awkward swearing. If Gabe doesn't put some variation on the word fuck into every single line that he speaks to other characters, his nuts are probably gonna fall off. Like, the guy needs to say fuck a lot, and it is so cringe because it never sits right. You've got a line that actually would be way more impactful if he didn't put fuck in it, because the fuck is awkward and makes it hilarious. The awkwardness of Gabe's character is hysterical. This edgy, awkward, male power fantasy man who swears too much, who sounds, in Jay Kristoff's head, grizzled and eccentric and gruff and angry, and it's so cringe. There's a bit at the end of one chapter where his jailer says to him, "Oh, you don't seem like much of a hero," and Gabe goes, "Who the fuck told you I was a hero?" He's so edgy. Jay Kristoff thinks he's written a really cool guy, and he's done the exact opposite. It's so cringe, and I am here for it. I am obsessed with Gabe. He's a wonderful, pathetic male power fantasy. I love him so much. Poor little himbo. It's so fucking cringe. So I've actually earmarked a few bits that I want to read out, which is what I'm going to do now. Gabe has been reunited with someone from his past, and that person comes up to him and says, "De Leon, ye live." Sadly. "How?" he hissed. "God didn't want me, and the devil was afraid to open the door." Okay, next bit. Okay, the end of part 2, or whatever these bits are called. Book 2, fuck knows. The vampire that's interviewing him for no reason at all to create this ridiculous, pointless framing device tells him off for jumping the story forward from his childhood to his years in his 30s as a badass vampire hunter. And he says, "No, you have to go back and tell your story from when you were a kid, because I want to know it for some reason." And he says, "No, you have to do that." And Gabriel says, "No, I don't have to do anything." But this is how he says it. Gabriel reached into his battered breeches, fished about under the monster's stare, and finally he retrieved a tarnished royale from his pocket. "Here," I imagine he does the flicky thing and it goes king and it flips into the air. "What is that for?" Jean-Francois demanded. "I want you to take this coin to market and buy me a fuck to give." Why does he talk like this? I know why he talks like this. Because he's a badass vampire hunter. This book is having so much fun, but I don't know if it's having the kind of fun it thinks it's having. Empire of the Vampire is really dreadful, and I love everything about it. Now, in its defense, it does a lot of things really well. When it isn't being awkwardly derivative of great fantasy novels, video games, anime, films, TV shows, and other fantastic gothic, vampiric, horror, and fantasy stories, it is telling a very compelling story. And the world building is a lot of fun. Jay Kristoff has had fun creating awkward and strange names for things that I really enjoy, because fantasy names typically are awkward and strange, and I really like them. There's a tongue-in-cheek aspect to some of it, definitely not all of it. Some of it I don't think he realizes is incredibly cringe and awkward and silly, but some of it does seem to be, and I appreciate that. I think he's tried to toe a line between a serious, epic fantasy narrative and fun, campy, schlocky vampire stuff, and I don't think he's towed that line successfully at all, but a stopped clock is right twice a day. What I love, unironically, about this book is its tone and its setting, its world, its general aesthetics, because I love vampires, I love fantasy, I love the gothic, I love horror, and it has all of those things in spades. It is a world drenched in darkness, with an empire of vampires rising up, sucking the life out of people, raiding villages, a group of gnarly cultist vampire hunters who say oui instead of yes for no reason, because this book is not set in France, the author is not French, there's just a lot of French stuff in it. Who knows why? Because it's exotic, maybe, and that's the kind of stuff that Jay Kristoff pulls. The cover is incredibly emblematic of this over-the-top, campy, extra-saturated, gothic bloody mess of a tone. Look at it! Look at it! This is what you get. This is what the book feels like. This ridiculous cover is how the whole thing feels. You got a lot of blood, you got swords, you got sex, but the sex is terrible because it's written from a male perspective. And that's what lets it down ultimately, is that it's an incredibly campy and schlocky, and therefore very kind of queer-coded story, written as a male power fantasy by a, what I assume to be, cis-het white man. There are illustrations as well, and in all the illustrations, the men are topless and ripped and covered in tattoos, and Jay Kristoff loves describing tattoos. He probably has a lot himself and thinks tattoos are edgy and cool. Now, I have a lot of tattoos, and I think tattoos are edgy and cool. That's why I have them. So I can sympathize with that. It's dreadful, and I love it so much. I am having so much fun with it. I am addicted to it. I will be honest, I don't know if I'll finish it, because I read a lot, I have a lot of books to review, I have a lot to get through. It'll probably take me months of just periodically reading 50 to 100 pages in between books that I need to read to review, and I might eventually just give up before I get to the end, I don't know. But I'm having so much fun along the way. The tone and atmosphere is perfect. It is too hypermasculine, and it feels like there shouldn't be so much masculinity in it. It is a vampire story, it is gothic, it should be more queer. It should be more campy and colourful. And anytime it leans into the camp and the colourful, you've got a ripped, butch, sexualized man saying fuck a lot to make sure you don't get too gay in your fantasy vampire book. You've got a writer who seems to be afraid of leaning into the queer when he's written a fantasy vampire book. Queer fantasy vampire book. Strong male protagonist leading the charge so it doesn't get too gay. Sure, you do you. Might have been more fun if you leaned into the queer a little bit more. But whatever, what do I know? I didn't write this, but I really wish I had when I was like 15. I would have loved the shit out of this book when I was a teenager, and I think that's part of the reason I love it now, is because you hit 30, you realise you're trans, and you start enjoying all the stuff you liked when you were 15 again as you enter a kind of second puberty. It's a lot of fun in that way. I'm going to read Twilight next, and I'm not joking. Subscribe for books.